Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and you're listening to edition 70 of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK, bringing you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. For anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback or recommend a guest for the show, you can do so by emailing us at info@thatalks.com. Again, that's info@thatalks.com. And don't forget, you can subscribe to our show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, welcome ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back on THA Talks as always. I'm going to do a few shout outs for some messages we've had recently. David Devons, love the podcast, I'm at number 45 and making my way through. I spend half my working day driving, so the podcasts are a real pleasure. I have a suggestion for a guest, Dane Wigington. Best to you both, thank you for the great shows. We will check out Dane Wigington and see if we can get him on the show, David, and thank you for the kind message. Also, Musket Teams, we suggest you interview Liam Sheff, author of Official Stories. That's from Musket Teams. So that's cool. Thank you, Musket Teams. MJ Mickleborough, I just found you guys. Listen to 3 casts a day. Very impressed. I really like the talk you had with Jack Wolf. I feel like that the cast really resonated well with me. I'll be looking more into the Odin Brotherhood and much of what you talked about being surrounded with the Odin Brotherhood. Thank you very much, guys. So thank you for that as well. That's a nice thing to say. New listener on our shoutbox, just found out, thanks for making the internet interesting again. Another nice one there. Joe Pole, I think he's referring here to our cast we done with Ron Moorhead on the Bigfoot. There's a man in Ontario, the name of his website is ontarosquatch.com. He has taught some words to a family of them. Check them out, Ron. Bye. Regards, Paul. So, yep, that's cool. Keep the messages coming in, folks, because we do like to hear them. And if I have forgotten anyone, maybe I'll pick him up next time and do that for you. But for now, I think we're going to crack on and we're going to go to the other side of London for a surge and a dramaturge and a man called David Parry.
Green sleeves was my delight, green sleeves was my heart of gold, green sleeves was my heart of joy, and who but my lady green sleeves?
That's the second song you've done in a row that I've really liked. Another awesome track there.
Henry VIII, of course, they say he wrote that as a Romanesca for his future Queen Consort Anne Boleyn.
Very English, isn't it?
Very, 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 very traditional, you might say.
In fact, I think they should play it in every fish and chip shop in England.
Oh, how to destroy a beautiful piece of music.
Well, nothing wrong with fish and chips.
Nothing wrong with fish and chips, just most of the people queuing up to buy them.
Well, anyway, I mean, this week's guest, you know him a fair bit through your Heathenry world of connections, and he's quite a popular person within the community now, isn't he?
He's a rising star in many fields. Young Tom Rowsell is a highly gifted filmmaker. He's, I believe, a very openly committed heathen, by which he would mean the northern tradition of European spirituality. But of course, he can explain that further as we go along. And yes, I mean, his work is inspired by these ancestral, traditional, cultural themes. I do count him as a very good personal friend. In fact, I think he's going to film one of my mini plays. But, you know, it's not about that. We're looking at his commitment after the launch of Frithgard Fellowship UK, of course, which was only a few days ago.
And that's Theo-Humanist Arts, isn't it? That's under our umbrella.
At the moment, we are delivering those events under Theo-Humanist Arts, and certainly that was a Theo-Humanist Arts event. Hopefully at one point, you know, we can still look after them. We can still offer a friendly and helpful hand, but I'm hoping that develops in its own direction as a project that we initiated.
Excellent. So, I thought I'd leave you to introduce him, seeing as you're more familiar with him than I am and knew him personally. I'm looking forward to getting on and talking to him, because I did see some of his documentary and it looked very well made, and it looked like he knew what he was talking about that tradition. We are trying to get more traditions on, more pagan talks in general on the show. I mean, we've had Wicca, we've had Heathenry before, and Odin Brotherhood, similar stuff. We'd like to get some druids on, wouldn't we, as well? Some druids and some shamans. So we're trying to cover the whole picture. And today we're getting stuck into the heathen thing again.
Oh, Paul, you're like me. The more the merrier. It's the libertarian ethos in me. I'm sorry, I'm a diehard libertarian. I don't apologise for it. The more voices, the better. The more schools of thought, the better. Let's all have a good chinwag. And there's nothing wrong with a healthy disagreement. Let's see what motivates us all. Absolutely fascinating for free thoughts and open minds.
That's right. Yeah, in the pagan community, you still get that human thing where people, they don't want to be a part of that, they don't want to be a part of this. But the bottom line is, it's all knowledge is good knowledge. Whether you resonate with the tradition or not, you should learn about it and find out what it is. And that's that. I find religions and traditions, it should be a big candy store with something for everyone.
Well, look, I don't know whether you agree with me or not that all roads lead to Rome, but I think we do, no pun intended, but I think we do agree that, it's only actually the opponents of neo-paganism that benefit when we're all in the middle of a Barney for no reason.
And of course, we'll have to get some atheists on the show as well, some Richard Dawkins types.
Don't give too much away, young man. You know the negotiations we're in.
Oh, well, actually, I might have missed this one, so that's it. You'll have to let me know off air.
Really? Very famous stage magicians who are also known...
Oh, right, I get you. Okay.
Now, be careful, because that particular guest and celebrity is a well-known libertarian and atheist.
Right, okay. Well, we'll have to give him the put him in the atheist chair then.
Well, you and I decided ages back that we wanted as many different people from as many different positions as we could get. I think people sometimes misread this show, and we think we're actually focusing on quite a narrow band, but we're not. Hey, we're building an audience, guys. Come on.
And it's not always easy to get all the people you want all the time. So help us out, folks. And if you, as I said, we've covered Wicca, Druid, Heathenry, and other bits and pieces. Get some Druids here, get some shamans, because I don't want to leave you guys out.
We want you all.
Anyway, should we crack on?
Let's get to it, Paul. Hi, Tom. It's really great to have you on the show. A very good Sunday afternoon to you.
Thanks for having me on, David.
Well, we've both been looking forward to it. We say that about all our guests, but we know you personally. We know you in the flesh, as it were. Let's flesh this out from the beginning. You're a filmmaker. I reviewed From Runes to Ruins, which I thought was a minor masterpiece. Minor only because it was short. We need a longer version.
Thank you.
Well, most certainly. I think that's clear. You're a critic. You're an active heathen. You've got a fascinating YouTube channel called Survive the Jive. Before we flesh that out, maybe we can explore one or two things. You and I first met at the London thing. That was in 2012, wasn't it? Oh, my God, all those years ago.
Yes, time flies, doesn't it?
Oh, no, oh, gosh, no. I believe it was there that you met Ralph Harrison, who's the director of the Odinist Fellowship, UK, and soon became a member of this group. Excuse me. Now, that for me opens up lots of speculative issues. What attracted you to heathenry in the first place? So that's a more primary question, I suppose. And what, in your view, is heathenry in its modern context?
Well, my initial interest in heathenry came from the fact that I think even in adolescence, I'd offhand said, while drunk, I think I might be a pagan, not really knowing very much about paganism, just in discussions with friends and things. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I believed in that faith for a time. And after going through an adolescent stage of rebellion, which sort of led me to the nihilistic atheism that most people seem to be wallowing in this age. I just generally thought that one thing that really took me out of it was my really deep appreciation of nature. Growing up in the rural England, it was something that I had. Well, if I'd grown up in the town, I probably would have gone out at night to clubs, or who knows what other young people do. But I didn't have that option, so my friends and I would go get drunk in a field, or go camping next to an ancient Anglo-Saxon barrow. And obviously this, we're all the products of our environment. So that was my environment. And but I didn't actually, I wasn't a heathen in any sense. I certainly didn't know anything about Anglo-Saxon paganism, but I just kind of felt like I knew that pagans were people who liked nature in the old days. And I thought maybe that's what I was, but I didn't go around calling myself a pagan or anything. Not for many years. I went to the degree, and that was just in media, and I wanted to go into media, and I was more politically minded, really. It wasn't really that I suddenly came to realize how important I think religion is, and is going to continue to be in the 21st century. So after I finished my degree, my interest in media was because I thought that media is the primary power that rules the way people think and understand the world. That's why I wanted to go into filmmaking and journalism and things. But certainly after moving to London and seeing like multicultural England, it does seem that you see where I live in East London, it's primarily a Muslim area. Like that's the majority population, and I see that is the sort of rhetoric I'd heard so often about, the decline of religious age and like we're moving into an age of rationalism just doesn't really hold true. Certainly when you look at non-Westerners, it seems that religion is the future, in fact. And I thought that's when I became more, reflecting. You look at them and you think, what about us? What do we have? We don't have this binding spiritual force. We don't have this connection with a tradition. Perhaps if I was a Roman Catholic still, I would have that. But I don't. I think there's some problems with Christianity, and then not necessarily. Well, in the sense that it's led towards its own demise in a way. We've seen that from from Martin Luther and the rebellions against the church, and its traditions are dependent on its authority. And as soon as that was questioned from within, you start to see. Well, as soon as Protestantism emerges, in my opinion, you have the decline of Western Christianity beginning, and it's very hard to re-establish the kind of deep reverence we had in the 13th century, for example, for Christianity. And I don't know if we'll ever get back there, and it might be a lost cause. But what I do think is that there is something, perhaps in paganism, that would be an opportunity, and that's why I went into a master's degree with more of an academic rather than a spiritual. What I thought an academic. Motivation, and I was obviously like deeply fascinated by everything I learned at university, and I'd already been reading not only about serious sort of sources about Anglo-Saxon history, but also about some of the esoteric characters like Aleister Crowley and whatnot, and non-Anglo-Saxon stuff like Freemasons and other kinds of alternative spiritual perspectives and esoteric interpretations. But as I learned more and more about it, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. There certainly is a gap, though, in the knowledge of what we have, particularly of Anglo-Saxon paganism, and it's slightly less so for Norse paganism, because at least we have the Eddas. But everything's second guessing and interpretation, even with all this content, and like, it has to be said that when you're talking about people who call themselves heathens now. I mean, there's this problem that no other religion has, really, if you want to call it a religion, which is you're looking at historical sources, which historians who are like, spend their entire lives trying to understand, argue over, and they're not necessarily, these aren't people who call themselves heathens, these are just atheists or Christians or whatever. But then people who have a rudimentary understanding of them, say this is their spiritual path in life and take things as truths. And that's not necessarily a problem from a spiritual perspective, but in my opinion, a religion has to have an authentic tradition. Yeah. And that's the question hanging over heathenry and paganism, that you have to argue with anyone who will criticize it, which is a valid criticism. What's authentic? What do we take from historical sources? How do we balance historical research, which is totally unspiritual, and divine interpretation and actual spiritual experiences, like that is, with nature, with divinity.
Gosh, I mean, certain people in the pagan community, I must admit, I might be one of them, have accused heathens, and of course I'm very friendly towards heathenry for obvious reasons, of being slaves of history. What do you think of that?
Well, I can see that from my understanding of paganism, this broad term of all these different sorts of people who revive various pre-Christian traditions, most of them don't really have a great deal of knowledge or dependence, at least, on historical sources, particularly Celtic Druidism and stuff. I mean, it really is. They've got a little bit of what Caesar wrote and a few things they reckon from the archaeological sources. They dress up like characters from Asterix, and that's their religion. And I mean, I have Celtic ancestry as well as Germanic ancestry, but I think one reason that I look more specifically at the Germanic is because there is more there you got more to go on. I mean, we know a lot about the Mediterranean paganism as well, and but as well, I think that I can see that there's this conflict, like the people who want to invent a religion. Like, actually, there's nothing wrong with that, because all religions have some deal of innovation involved.
Oh, well said. Well said.
But then again, total innovation is quackery. That's not authentic. That's not a religion. You're kind of, if you're admitting that you've just invented it, then you're admitting it's not a religion, because you have to believe it. If you're just saying, oh, this would be quite good, like, well, where's the authenticity in that? Why are you basing your belief in literally everything, the whole structure of the universe, on something you've just cooked up? It's not really, it's not authentic. You need to believe it authentically, or you're wasting your life, in my opinion.
Gosh, equally well said. And I mean, was there a particular reason why the Odinist Fellowship? I mean, was it more organized than other heathen groups, or what? Wasn't it an issue? Did you just think, okay, that's come along, that's interesting? I mean, why then?
I didn't make any selections or groups. They weren't the first pagan group I'd ever spoken to. I've never made any oaths or any I've never been involved in any initiation rituals to any groups. I just spoke to them, and they told me what the initiation ritual or the oaths were, and I said I wasn't willing to say them, but that I explained what I believed and who I was, and they said, well, actually, that's okay. You can join. You can be you can be a member anyway, and I really admire what they're doing, and then by chance it was them who were the first pagan group in history since our actual pagan times to have acquired bricks and mortar around an actual temple. Yeah, and that impressed me a great deal, because I said to them before that I thought was a primary thing, like to distinguish the sort of wishy-washy foundations of this new spiritual tradition, which is what I consider it. It's not just a reconstruction; it's a construction as well. But it needs to have a central point. It needs to have this thing, and they were on that same wavelength, and Ralph Harrison achieved that, so he deserves credit for that. So I'm glad that I met them, but it was just chance that they were there at your meeting, and I just turned up because I thought it'd be an interesting thing to film and put on my YouTube channel.
Excellent stuff. Well, yes, I mean, we were accused of all sorts of things after that meeting. I mean, somewhat surprisingly, dare I say bewilderingly. I mean, I think it was a very affirming and inclusive occasion. So where all these criticisms by unnamed people who weren't present, of course, should spoil such a good thing. Paul, I can't get Paul in yet. Tom, you said the other day, I mean, we launched the Frithgard Fellowship UK. You and Vladimir Wiedemann were the three conveners the other day. I mean, your background as a Roman Catholic, which I think I'd heard before, came up then. And I thought it was very interesting when you spoke so passionately and eloquently against modernity and materialism. Very, very, very refreshing. I mean, you and I don't agree on every point, but I think there's a common theme which we do agree on. Why do you think we need a new heathen group? Because certain people are criticising us already, which is a little premature because we've not really got off the ground yet. But, you know, in your mind, to your view, why do we need another?
Well, I don't think that I don't want to directly criticise any existing groups because I don't know all about them anyway, so I'm not capable of giving a detailed deconstruction of their merits and faults. But the fact is, you and I happen to live in the capital, and there's a lot of people here, and it's the centre of England in a sense. And there are the meetings that happen in this area are, and I've attended a few, and they're nice little gatherings. What I really think that what we can achieve with the Frithgard Fellowship is a meeting of minds, not necessarily rituals and such, but just as we had an inaugural meeting, people with differing opinions speaking freely about them, and I think just a free association of people with vaguely or at least defined spiritual similarities that must be that can collaborate with each other, assist each other, and come to some conclusions at this difficult junction in the spiritual history of our people, which is, I think, there has to be a change, a transformation, and it's either going to, it's going to happen, but to which direction, it's dependent on what groundwork people put in now. Certainly, I don't think that rational materialism provides an actual legitimate path for human beings to live contently. And so those that do so now are happy with it only as much as they have distractions. They have to get drunk very frequently. They have to take drugs. They have to be distracted with all kinds of things. And they often feel very unfulfilled, and then when they start to turn for it to some religions, some of them go back to their old religions. That's fine. Actually, I prefer that people become devout Christians and they go to some of the neo-spiritual paths, which I think are damaging because they're not authentic, they're not sincere, and also even the Dalai Lama, I think he's quite correct. He said he was against religious conversions because of the conflict it causes between groups. When you if you're raised as a Western person and you convert to Buddhism, you don't approach it as it was in the traditions of the region of the world that it came from. And this is from the Dalai Lama's own mouth. It's not just my personal opinion. So often you get sort of middle-aged women having crisis and thinking they're going to be a yogi or something, or young men think they'll convert to Islam because they see it as, the only heroic options. And I can see why both of those are valid options from those perspectives, because they see an ancient tradition of religions that are virile and authentic compared to dying Western religions, but there's also the inauthenticity of not accepting who you are as a Westerner, and I think that's something that paganism has to be explicitly Western, European. That's why I don't become a Muslim, or why I don't become a Buddhist. These paths I'm not anti-Muslim or anti-Islam or anti-Buddhist. These are legitimate spiritual paths, but they're just not the right path for our people.
Gosh, I mean, I remember reading Alain de Benoit at university, yes, billions of years ago, blah, 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 dinosaurs, and thinking this is a highly significant writer, a highly significant contributor to neo-paganism. Do you have a particular view towards neo-paganism generally, or do you think that's a false question?
I sort of covered it already, but I think there's, as I said, there's the problems of it, of the different paths. I mean, it can be very dangerous to, if you believe in the spiritual sphere, you believe in spiritual forces and powers, then you also have to be wary of which ones you're exposing yourself to. So being totally open-minded to all things, it sounds very good, but, well, you need to I think, to quote a Catholic, I think it was Chesterton who said, the point of opening your mind is to close it firmly on something.
Oh, God, I would disagree with G.K. Chesterton on some things. But, look, I asked you that question. I know you've covered a lot of this territory already, but I think you're such an intriguing man that our listeners want to know, slightly more in depth than usually for a first-time interview, where you're coming from. I mean, do you practice anything like rune yoga? Do you sing Galdra? Do you have a particular practice?
I think the runes are the most interesting part of the Germanic tradition. Actually, that was one of the things that that attracted me to them. I think I just saw them in in fact, I made a music video in 2007 from a band I was in then, and it got some popularity. It got mentioned on Radio 1. But it was a sort of folk horror music video with vampires, zombies and things, and some ancient scroll. And when I just had to make the prop of an ancient scroll, and I didn't even know about Nordic runes, but I was just looking for weird esoteric symbols to put on besides the pentagram, which everyone knows. And I saw these, and I was like, wow, these are good. So I tried to paint them in something that looked like blood on this old parchment for the effect. And it's something chilling, powerful about these symbols. I don't know what it was. It resonated with me, I don't know, at a visceral level, you know what I mean. But it was. And then I think I saw them again in some other videos or something. Some heavy metal band might have used them. And then it was this something has a power beyond their function as writing. And that was apparent to me, and that was something that really attracted me. So runes I like, and I rather than I don't use them in the only magical or spiritual description of rune usage we have in historical sources of the carving, as Tacitus mentions what we presume he refers to as runes when he says carving symbols on sticks, which they use to cast lots. I don't do that. I've never attempted to see the future or anything like that. I'm not really that interested in that, but I do use it as a way. I use runes just as a way to organize thoughts. So if you associate a particular rune with a certain thought process, it's easier to think in symbols than in the complex concepts that they represent. So we all think in symbols. So if you actually consciously organize thoughts according to symbols, you can much more easily retrieve certain thought processes for certain purposes. There's a kind of meditation, I guess, depending on how you want to use that term. But that I find, and I certainly, I find, I'd probably say the most spiritual thing to me is just spending time alone in nature. That's very important to me to occasionally, especially living in London now. I have to get out of the city occasionally. Whenever I go to the jungle, in the Amazon jungle, as I did last year, I did a survival course where I went into the Amazon with nothing but a machete and a mosquito net. Wow. And tried to do 4 days survival and just finding food. More recently this year, I went to an ancient rainforest in Thailand, one of the oldest of its rainforests in the world, or just even in England, going to the, wherever, the Peak District, the Lake District, or just a small forest somewhere, and just sitting down and feeling your space and where you are in space and time. The atmosphere, the environment, as I said before, shapes who we are, and not just on a personal level over the course of our lives, but in an immediate sense as well. Where you are at a certain time affects how you're feeling and who you perceive yourself to be, or how you feel about yourself in relation to the world. And I think that the more time you spend around nature, it's humbling. I don't worship, when some people talk about pagans, when nature worship, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because I don't worship mushrooms and mud or anything like that. I don't worship leaves on trees. I don't see these as divine specifically, but these are symbolic of divinity. They can be, and you can use them as a way of understanding divinity. And certainly I understand the sacral nature of specific natural areas and beautiful sites. Beauty to me is divine, and that's why that affects my opinions on art and music and things. But and I'm very, that's one of my problems with modernity. Look, there's quite quite a dearth of. We're starved of beauty, I think, in many parts of literature and art and in public art specifically. It's quite revolting to me often these days.
Gosh, I think. Excuse me, we'll get Paul in there. I mean, I am a nature worshipper. I think we'll agree that we both have a great passion towards the natural world, because there won't be time to explore that on this particular interview, but obviously you're coming back at some point. Paul, my dear, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to touch on the controversial side of it all, because I think that's always the interesting stuff. Basically, I mean, we've got, we all know there's the controversy with the racial element, and there's a lot of pagans. It's like, those are the bad guys. They're the racist bunch, and obviously not referring to all heathens, just certain groups that they see. I mean, it comes from this Aryan race. Perhaps maybe because not everyone listening now is completely clued up with all this. Maybe could we just sort of let us know what were the Aryan race? I'm talking on the spiritual concept, because you've got that belief that this Aryan race were the superior race. They're obviously white, and I mean, where do you stand with that? And what within history? Give us a little bit of a rundown of the history of that and what it all means. Let's just get stuck into that a little bit.
Well, certainly, I don't. I had to make absolutely clear, I don't consider the Nordic peoples to be the Aryan race. Right. The Aryan terminology is like, the term Aryan is not very popular in academic circles, obviously, anymore. It was about 100 years ago, and it was used partially for a linguistic distinction because of the relation between the Indo-European languages. We know that Hindi, Parsi, the Persian language, the language of the Hittites from the Bible, all the European languages except for Finnish and Hungarian, and many other languages, in many Indian languages, all have a common root, which that's undeniable, which generally is called Proto-Indo-European now. Might have been called Proto-Aryan at one point. And rather than simply being a linguistic connection between these diverse peoples, they realized that there are also commonalities in their religious practices. So there's like etymological relationships between certain key figures in Norse cosmology, which match up with Hindu. And there's all kinds of stuff like parallels between Hinduism and the Norse mythology, as well as with other Iranian and Latin paganism. So there was presumably a reason for the common language root and the religious root. And some people used to think it was a single race who were responsible for that. And certainly we know that there were expansions and people were doing that, but there were people who were responsible for the primordial religion and language from which these languages and religions came from. That, I think, is obvious. But whether they, continue to constitute one race, that's not really. I mean, it depends on what your definition of race. Certainly not in the modern scientific materialist conception of race. No, that isn't true. Well, that's evident from the genetic diversity of those peoples today. But yes, also we know that the Nordic peoples have, they've been there for a long time up there, and they've been in Europe for a long time. So, but they have also heritage from outside Europe. So that could be related to some people who were related to the if it's the Kurgans or whatever, I don't know. This is speculative, but really, racial materialism is not a spiritual subject. It's a materialist subject. So I think that's a bit misguided to kind of focus on that too much if you're talking about religion. But the fact that where it becomes relevant is the fact that these religions have a common root, and that's connected to language and obviously this all changed after the Second World War and the countercultural generation, as well as like the post-Nazi stuff. Yeah. Everyone has to be very cautious not to be associated with Nazis, but it's become a bit silly as well, I think, because people saying, like, on the one hand saying, oh, if he's just said about a religion which is tied up with ancestry, well, that sounds racist. I think that's a bit scary. Well, just a second, go to Japan, talk to Shintoists, talk to Jews in Israel, talk to most of the world's religions, having this reverent like connection between your spirituality and your ancestors is quite a normal and healthy part of any spiritual identity. It's only really the two universal religions of Christianity and Islam that break away from that. And saying that anything except Christianity and Islam is racist is just moronic, to be honest. I'm not really interested in debating with someone who thinks that. So that's my opinion.
Yeah. Do you think there are people within the heathen movement that are a bit like that, or do you think
certainly there are? Because if your political identity is concerned primarily with your racial identity, then you can't. It's very hard for you to reconcile your political beliefs with a universalist religion. So you're going to look for those kind of paths. So you're going to look for a religion that will validate your political identity, but that doesn't invalidate that religious identity. The fact that those two are connected doesn't have any. You can't then say a religion is invalid unless you want to say that some religions are right and some are wrong, in which case you're instantly going against the whole pluralist, multicultural ethos anyway. So no, I mean, I kind of, I mean, I'm not really into the, I'm not exactly a right winger as some would put it, but I must admit, I mean, today in today's society, I think society generally just goes overboard a bit with a racial thing. Like it could be to the point that you couldn't even have a football match without it being racist. So I mean, I do see that side of it as well. It's but it seems to be something that's very much in our society at the moment. So moving on a little bit from that, what looking at lots of traditions, like it seems there's always some higher consciousness or higher being that's communicating information, which then someone teaches, be it the ancient Kabbalah, which was supposedly channeled by angels to obviously the ancient Jews, that the knowledge they received. Then you've got an Enochian magic where people received information from angels, and then obviously Christian Paul received from the spirit of Jesus, and even Muhammad, angel Gabriel. And do you think that, I mean, that this is the same with the heathen? I mean, way back in ancient times, did the heathens somehow receive some knowledge from some divine angel or higher force? What are your views on that? Yes. It's a short answer. That is exactly how the source, the Edic sources describe even Odin, who is somehow at once a god and a man in different respects. He receives divine instruction from other divine figures, giants, or sometimes from the vulva, some kind of primordial sacred witch who even the gods can learn from. So, this is just as the difference being, though, you don't have like a year zero in Indo-European traditions. There's no like, this was the day when the divine communicated with the material sphere. We wrote it down, and now we know forever what we have to do. That's not how it works. It's a constant dialogue. So, yeah, even it's if we look at the sources, it appears that the deities are learning.
Yeah,
and they're on a quest for knowledge, and that involves communication with other divine entities, and presumably that's exactly what the people did as well. We have the example of I can't remember the Iceland chieftain's name, who was responsible in the sagas apparently for choosing that the Icelanders should convert to Christianity. He was a pagan himself, but he was trying to mediate between arguing pagans and Christians. And when he decided to do that, well, the way the process he went through to make the decision is to sit in solitude with a blanket over his head. And for a certain amount of time, a long time. Why? Presumably he was trying to reach some kind of divine instruction. I don't think there was anything written on the inside of the blanket. He was meditating on it, like Buddha under his tree. Or I think we can see some parallels to that. And I think certainly we don't. I mean, anyone saying I'm a pagan, if you say that, then you're not likely to look at. You don't have a Bible. You don't have a prophet. You don't have a clear primary authority who's spelled out exactly the direction of your spiritual path, which is quite difficult, because it makes it harder, because not what they would have had in those times. The actual pagans is, without that specific prophet, they would have had traditions instead, and that's how they wouldn't have been so directionless in their spiritual questing. So we don't have those traditions, and that's a problem that makes it not that's the problem I have with heathenism, is not really, we don't actually have we have to sort of find our own way in the dark, like groping in the darkness. And that's obviously, you have the comforting aspect of the monotheistic religions, that they know what's right and wrong. Sometimes they fail to be right according to their the instructions of their religion, but they can always, atone and go back onto the straight and narrow. We kind of don't really know for sure, and we have to discuss with each other what we think is right and wrong, and come to some agreement on that. But we don't have. But I do think that people should I think that people should, through meditation, try to understand what actions to take in the real world, like through deep thought, and perhaps that will give them some divine insight.
Yeah, I mean, that a lot with that monoistic religions, it's kind of handing the buck, isn't it? It's kind of saying, I've sinned. Oh, well, that was the devil's fault. God will forgive me. It's a little bit like that. Another thing, before we get David back on board, a lot of heathens, even some I've spoken to, which are nice chaps for that matter, they don't regard themselves as pagans as such. It's like you say, well, we're not pagans. Now, personally, I kind of sort of scratched my head with that. I was thinking, hang on, you're multi-deities, there's a lot of nature involved and natural this and that. So I was, where do you? I mean, you've mentioned yourself being a pagan, so I'm assuming that you do regard yourself as a pagan, and you don't share that.
I reluctantly use these terms because I think, so everyone knows, these are pejoratives. Paganus, used by the Romans to describe, it means country dwellers, calling us bumpkins, or calling them bumpkins, because Christianity in the Roman Empire, as Tacitus described it, was an urban phenomenon, and the strongholds of paganism in the Roman Empire were in the countryside. So just like it was we're calling them rednecks basically. And then heathen is much the same, it has the same function. It's not any term that they would have used to describe themselves, any of these people would describe themselves as that. So, and certainly they didn't think of themselves as a religion. When they talk about their gods, but they don't talk about their religion, it wasn't like that. I mean, there was no clear boundary, I don't think. And perhaps the fact that the Norse pantheon includes two separate sets of gods is evidence for that, of a merging of gods from different pantheons. So, and the fact that was possible. So yeah, I mean, the distinction nowadays obviously has something else. It's to do with modern identity politics, like someone who says that I'm a heathen, not a pagan. They're probably just saying, I only want to be, I'm only interested in the Germanic traditions, not in any others, and that's fine if they want. That's okay. There's no rules, are there? So, yeah. I mean, the terms though, the words kind of mislead because they have no connection with any spiritual path that has ever existed in the past. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't use them now. But we live in multi-faith, globalized world, and people want to know what you are and what you stand for. I don't know if it's helpful to describe yourself as a pagan or heathen, but some people choose to do that, and if that's fine as well.
Okay, well, David, you are ready to come back on in?
Well, I mean, again, Tom's one of those multifaceted people that we could talk to for hours, which is why he's got to come back at some point, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a bit about Survive the Jive. Tom, what was your inspiration behind that? And, the quality of the filmmaking is incredibly high, surprisingly high, dare I say, for a bitter old thespian like myself. And it covers so many different areas. I mean, I was watching recently something on Chinese funeral rites taking place in East London. It covers your travels in the Orient. I mean, what's the idea behind Survive the Jive? And tell us a bit about the projects you've been involved with.
Well, I just started when I came out of studying media in Brighton. I decided to start a blog because blogging was what people should do. Everyone said blogging, it was when that was a fashionable thing. I started a blog, and it was around the time the first iPhone came out, and I was quite disgusted with the way people were talking about iPhones. Like I got my first smartphone in September, so I've been resisting it for a long time, and it wasn't an Apple one. So I don't like having technology on me all the time. I know I work on the internet, have YouTube channels and a blog, so it's kind of hypocritical, but I try and avoid as much as I can, or I did at least for a while. But basically, Survive the Jive was called, so the Jive was then, I was referring to sort of modernity in terms of materialism, consumerism, mostly like consumerism, and I wanted to be a political journalist, and I was trying to get into that, and I was very, very concerned about the surveillance state under New Labour at the time. So that was my motivation for starting it. Obviously, as my career in journalism in London evolved, I changed the blog to just be about whatever I happened to be doing at the time, and made a YouTube partner because I got a lot of views on one video, which was just telling people an instruction video explaining how to identify magic mushrooms. But but I thought it was, at the time, there weren't good instructions, and I always heard in school, like, so many people get poisoned every year. I thought, well, I might as well do a public service and explain to these people how to tell the difference, because I know that. But anyway, now, as obviously when I became more interested in paganism, you see more and more pagan videos. The only theme that holds the whole channel together, the diversity of content, is that it's things that I'm interested in at the time, and generally they have an anti-modern bent to them, like an sort of, trying to get behind the jive of modernity, if you will, to use that term. Yeah, like the Chinese funerary rites, for example. That's just by my house. I was walking along, and I hear horn blowing and bells, and then there were these local Somalians were gathering around these Chinese people. Like, they didn't understand what's happening, and I wasn't sure either. But I thought it was interesting, so I just whipped my phone out and filmed it. But other videos are much more planned. Like, I sometimes have a script and a historical. I do a historical location, and I explain something about that, and they sort of teach people something in about a 5-minute video. I actually have my first film, the first long film I didn't get anything out of it. It was a documentary called Boobs and Revolution, which is on my channel. And I went to Venezuela to make that, and it was about, I was very interested in the Bolivarian Revolution of Hugo Chavez. I'm not exactly a socialist, but I have a kind of admiration for him. But I also have sympathy for his enemies, because I'm going there and see why it's not very nice to be labeled one of the oligarchs if you're just a middle-class person and suddenly have property seized because it's in the name of the revolution. I don't like that kind of thing. But also I like the way he's kind of against the New World Order, if you want to use that term. Like, he was a bit of a heroic figure in that sense. So yeah, I kind of just went there and I looked at the issue of breast surgery, which is something he labeled the ultimate degeneration. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, because it was like he was against this aspect of modernity, which I find revolting as well. It's kind of vanity that's imposed on the young women and make them feel they have to cut up their bodies or stuff. And I like that, but I wanted to see how it was it demonstrated a totally different perspective between the proletariat of that country and the middle class, and anyway, the documentary's up there if you want to see it. But that's the only other feature-length film I made for From Ruins to Ruins.
I mean, I've got a great sympathy with Hugo Chavez myself for one simple reason. He was speaking at the UN after George Bush at one point and made that wonderful line from The Wizard of Oz, "I can still smell the sulphur," which I think resonated with a great many people. I mean, I can't let you off the hook yet, Tom. I mean, you seem to have a great respect for Hinayana Buddhism. I mean, tell us what's going on there and tell us why.
Theravada Buddhism I'm a fan of because I went to Sri Lanka, and I'd been to Thailand twice. My brother lives out there, and Laos as well. Obviously, that's a Theravada country. And or as someone who's like spiritually experimental, or at least interested in these kind of things, and has grown up in the West, we kind of only see. And even when I've been to like the Middle East and worked out there in 2007 in Qatar, but there's something different about this. It comes more partially, the Pali Canon comes from an Indo-European tradition, so we're almost looking at something more similar, at least partially to our own historical traditions in a way. Obviously not Buddhism itself, but because Theravada Buddhism is linked with the indigenous spiritual customs of pre-Buddhism and also with Hinduism, it's very interesting and with nuanced regional variations. And I found out that my forebears lived in Sri Lanka for a time. So I wonder if that's some kind of ancestral memory that drew me there. And I was really feeling in Sri Lanka like, wow, I feel like I've been here or I could live here. And 2 generations of my family lived there. So growing tea, whatever. But yeah, I find it, the colors of the temples, the reverence. I went into Buddhist temples to pray and to make merit in all those countries, and it's very different to, we can read books and stuff and talk about how things should be, but I really think that I really recommend that anyone who is interested in Indo-European polytheistic traditions should go to India or to the Far East or something and look at or go into a Hindu temple and see how it's done and what the difference is, because I think I like that people want to be pagan and stuff. I like that they're looking at new options for the West, because I think that's vital. We need to do that. It's an essential thing for our culture that we find a spiritual identity. But yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from India and Sri Lanka. The reverence that's involved is it's not really there, to be honest, in like any pagan thing I've ever seen in Europe. It's just like people are it's kind of like a happy meeting up, have a few drinks kind of thing. It's not like that in a real religious environment. And I think that's something that it's beautiful to experience it as a living religion, and rather than something we're just reconstructing. So that's the closest thing on earth that we have to our ancestors' religion, in my opinion.
Very interesting. I mean, yes, forgive me, I stand corrected. That's Theravadin territory, not Hinayana. Yeah. You were recently on an Arabic channel, not Al Jazeera. I can't remember what you said a few days ago.
Iqra.
Thank you, my boy. I mean, what was their attitude to your work, and why did you agree to be interviewed?
Oh, well, any publicity is good publicity. That was my thinking. But actually, it was a business. It was Health Wealth. It was a show, and I had a connection with the channel through a friend, and they said, "We'd like to interview you about your innovation in filmmaking and like that kind of thing," because I did it all off my own back. That was why they were interested in like sort of entrepreneurism and sort of resourcefulness. And I just edited it down and put it on my channel without all the stuff that was not relevant to my film. So it was actually a much longer talk than what that thing is. But it makes it seem like they were interviewing me just about my film, but they were really interviewing me about making films and that sort of thing. And yeah, it was interesting. They didn't seem to have, they didn't express any major interest in any of my projects specifically.
Oh, I thought you'd handled yourself remarkably well no matter what. I think we're both aware of what the media can do. Paul, any last questions from you before we start rounding off?
what it's how much magic is involved in excuse me in heathenry? Because I mean, I know the runes are very magical and whatnot, but I mean, you yourself, are you into the magical side of things, or is it just purely religion for you?
Well, religion.
If you don't mind me asking, of course.
Well, I kind of, it's hard for me to make the distinctions here because, I mean, in any case, religion, spirituality, magic, you're talking about supernatural things. You're talking about non-rational. So technically, I mean, I'm sure a rationalist would say, like, if Moses turning staff into snake, that's magic or whatever, or talking snakes is magic, or Marian apparitions are magic, so, or jinns from Islam are magic. So technically, like, maybe the distinction isn't that helpful because magic is something that people associate with like make believe,
trickery, and
or like Paul Daniels or something. So I don't do anything like that actually, but I mean, say the magic I studied, which is the equivalent in the Norse tradition, is Seidr, but I don't practice that because from what we know of the Norse tradition, it wasn't customary for men to practice it. They could do, but it wasn't necessary. It wasn't an essential part of a spiritual life, and I'm not that bothered about it. But I do just try to, like, to me, what's the point in having religion? Like, well, we do it because we don't think that the rational explanation for existence is sufficient. It's unsatisfactory, so we look for something else, and we're trying to make meaning, get some kind of meaning to our life. If people want to cast spells or something to do that, then I'm in no position to stop them. But I don't see personally how that would be of any use to me. But I mean, I don't deny. I mean, the problem with the definitions, like, some people say they believe in what's it called, the power of the will. That's even Nietzschean, and he was, very anti-Christian, but I don't know if he was an atheist. But the power of the will almost has a magical aspect to it because it's sort of, you manifest a reality based on something that is metaphysical. You make it real by the force of your will. And I wonder sometimes what is will itself. I know theologians have argued about that as well, but it's sort of like, seems to me that it's the conscious manifestation of something that is inherent in all life. It's what causes, it's the will of the amoeba to replicate. It's the will of the grass blades to reach towards the sun, and it's manifested in a conscious life form as what we call will. And then I think that has some, you could call that magic if you wanted. But yeah, I definitely believe that people should have, the power of the will is real, but it's not the sole aspect of the spiritual path. I don't believe it's the entirety. I think you have to balance it with other things, including negation of the will.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up, David. Unless there's anything you want to add here.
Well, I want to say one last thing. I mean, Tom and I were talking recently about his thought, his project, his proposal to maybe teach runes or rune workshops. I mean, is there any progress on that?
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. I could, I mean, I'd be interested in doing something like that, or discussing with people some kind of runic meditation ideas, or like some groundwork for how people might go and do that. If it wasn't, if people were interested, I'd certainly be willing to have a meeting and talk to people about that. I think you had some interesting people at your London thing, David, performing Galder, and they sound like they had something quite interesting going on there.
I think you and I need to get our heads together off air. Paul, I think we're rounding off. Young Tom, do you want anything put on our website in particular? Do you want to draw our listeners' attention to anything specific?
Wait, who, me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were talking to Paul. Yeah, well,
both of you.
Please, if you haven't seen my film From Runes to Ruins, you can watch it online. It's pay to rent. It's about £1.60, £1.70, and you get access for 3 days. It's a 50-minute film. David said it's short, but I think 50 minutes is quite sufficient without adverts. But I haven't made my money back on it, so I'm still plugging it, and I hope that you enjoy it. It's a film about Anglo-Saxon paganism and how we should look to our ancestors and the landscape to understand it, and how I also talk to people in modern Britain whose lives are influenced by the Anglo-Saxon pagan religion of our forebears.
Well, for the sake of clarity, this definitely is aimed at Paul. I think we're done. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, no, it's been great speaking to you, Tom. Very interesting stuff, and always welcome to come back on and talk to us some more.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
No problem.
David.
Have a very good afternoon, my boy. Take care.
And that was Tom Rowsell.
A fascinating young man. Chinese funereal rites in East London, the mysteries of Theravada Buddhism, and a staunch Nordic heathen. My heavens, that covered some territory.
Yeah, and you were quite at home with that because you obviously got a lot of heathen roots yourself.
I wear many caps. I tend to describe myself as a pagan. I'm very proud to be a heathen Godi. I'm equally proud to be a Wiccan.
Yeah, well, that's the wonders of paganism. It's your own. It's your own religion, and you do it how you want to do it.
Well, I suspect since these traditions, after centuries of persecution, are recovering, there's something of a mix and match that is just necessary. I think people get too worried about syncretism. Hey, it's part of life. And certainly, I think the witches of old, as an old witch myself, the witches of old would have had that attitude. What was it Margaret Murray said? There was operative witchcraft and ritual witchcraft, and the two are not the same. And I think she had a very strong point there. Yeah,
yes. As I said earlier on in the show, it's good to get this these sort of pagan subjects up on the show, because that's where you and I come from. That's our lives and so on. And obviously we touch on a lot of other subjects, but it's we just think it's interesting stuff, don't we? Because even people that aren't into it, it's interesting stuff to hear about, I think.
Oh, it is interesting stuff. We promise our listeners we're expanding our wings as we speak here.
Yes, indeed we have. In fact, coming up on the show, we've got world-renowned esotericist and author and voice coach Stuart Pearce coming on the show, so that's going to be a great show. Also got Andrew Goff coming on for the Rem Le Chateau talk. And we also have Santos Bonucci, again, more esoteric knowledge there, and as above, so below talk, some really interesting stuff there. So it's all coming up, folks, and also, obviously, various other guests that you guys have recommended to us. We are chasing them up, but sometimes it can take a little bit of time to get through and so on. But feel free to message anyone as well you want on the show. If you want to send them a message to get in touch with us, please do so.
And don't hold back with areas we haven't covered yet. It's you lot not suggesting them.
Excellent. Yep, I agree. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. It's been great. Don't forget, if you can afford, pop to our website and throw down a donation. Link the show to your friends. Tell them all about it. And more importantly, please keep downloading the show. I think that's it for this week, David.
That's it. We've covered a lot. Time for Sunday lunch.
Take it easy, folks. See you later.
Jazzy.